Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ProcureCon webinar, ERPs Can't Do It All, How Modular Sourcing Solutions Can Help. Now, before we begin, I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the console that's laid out in front of you. Now, whether you're new to ON24 or a seasoned veteran, the windows or widgets, as we might refer to them as, that are laid out on your screen are 100% customizable, meaning you can move them around. Feel free to maximize them, minimize them, even reposition them to fit whatever device you're using to connect with today. And if you accidentally minimize a window, all you can do is pop into the menu dock at the bottom of your screen to bring it right back up. Now we're going to try to save some time today, roughly maybe 10 to 15 minutes or so at the end of the discussion for a Q&A session. So at any point, feel free to submit questions using that specific Q&A portal that's right there up on your screen. And if you want to get some familiarity with this window, feel free to type in and let us know where you're listening in from. We also have some content loaded up for you in the Resource Center portal for direct downloading. And that essentially means that there's no forms, no fuss. If you're on the fence about attending next year's ProcureCon Indirect East event, hopefully the 2019 agenda and the 2018 attendee list can give you a great snapshot. We also have a discount code available, so click on the link or email us at webinar.wbresearch to find out more about that. Today's webinar session is going to be led by Andrew Wolf. He is the President and CEO of Wolf Procurement. We're also joined by Cam Davies, the Product Marketing Manager at Bonfire. We're very excited to have both of these gentlemen on board for today's webinar, so without further ado, let's kick things off. Cam, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for attending today. So my name is Cam, and I'm with Bonfire, and today my goal is to be your technology pundit and your technology guide in all things ERP sourcing and modular sourcing. We've asked Andrew Wolf here, who's an industry expert, a previous CPO with decades of experience working in the procurement industry, to add some color commentary and to really add some interesting notes about his experience in the field with respect to technology and procurement. We'd like to address the growing world of software and procurement and position this not as much as a presentation, but more as a discussion. And we really hope that throughout the presentation today, you're saving up some great questions, and we have a lively Q&A towards the end. To kick things off, the agenda today. So we're going to talk about the history of ERP briefly. We're going to talk about using ERPs for sourcing, and this is where Andrew's really going to jump in and be able to add some color commentary from his previous experience. Talk about how there are new modular options, SaaS options emerging in the world, and where they fit into the procurement tech space. We're going to talk a little bit about how to go ahead and choose one of those modular solutions, and then again, we really hope to generate a great Q&A towards the end. To start things off, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to what an ERP is and how a modular sourcing solution differs. So an ERP, we're most familiar, an ERP is an integrated management of core business process, often mediated by software and technology. The goal of an ERP often is to connect different business processes, different departments, and have a common set of data across the business to manage risk and automate data-driven tasks. Modular solutions, on the other hand, however, are emerging as a newer player in the space that are solving deeper workflow challenges and nuances within specific parts of the business. We're finding in many discussions with others that ERPs are missing functional depth, and it's often in a lagging position, whereas these modular solutions are missing the broader business context. And so they provide very different context, but unique value. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, when you're looking at it from a source-to-pay perspective, ERPs tend to be stronger on the transactional side, or I guess the supply chain integration. They do very well at transacting off of a pre-existing supplier or contract, and then integrating well with the ordering systems, inventory management, production, accounts payable, etc. When you start getting into other functions such as sourcing, contract management, supplier management, and even category management, there's a much higher degree of flexibility, adaptability, and collaboration that's required. And that's where you tend to see ERPs fall short, and where it probably makes more sense to start considering a more modular-based application.
Great. So with that, we're really curious to start with our first poll. We have a couple polls today. we want to start to get your feedback, and we're going to actually be able to see the results in real time. So considering those as we navigate through, as well as potentially generating some great questions towards the end. So the first poll is, we'd like to know what kind of tools you're using today to facilitate your sourcing, whether it's a module within your ERP, whether it's the sourcing module within your procure-to-pay system. If you are using an e-sourcing software, something like Bonfire, or if you're like the majority of other sourcing professionals, you're probably relying on email, PDFs, and spreadsheets kind of outside of any of these systems. So please take a minute to answer the poll, and we will show the results shortly. We'll just give another 30 seconds for folks to pop in their response, and then we'll advance to see what the results are. All right, let's see what some of the responses are for this poll. That's great news. So we have almost half of the folks on the line here are using some sort of e-sourcing software, which is really welcome news, seeing some of the benefit of a standalone system that deals with e-sourcing. Andrew, are you surprised at all by seeing kind of the split on the ERP versus P2P and then a dedicated piece of software?
No, not today. If you would have asked me maybe about a year or so ago, I would see maybe it a little bit more reverse, or obviously less on the e-sourcing. But I think as we get into the webinar a little bit more, e-sourcing tools are becoming much more popular because they're easy to implement, easy to use, and obviously are much more suited to many companies' processes and strategies out in the marketplace.
Are you surprised at all to see that over 15% of people out there are still using email and spreadsheets for their sourcing activities?
No, I mean, it might be a little bit lower because I do see a lot of people, especially, I mean, those that are using e-sourcing software, sometimes if it's the wrong e-sourcing software, they're still using spreadsheets. I would have expected to see that number a little bit higher just because spreadsheets is within that category.
Great. Okay, let's jump forward. This is an interesting poll to consider. So the first step I'd really like to take, since this is a whole webinar about how ERPs can't quite do it all, is a little bit about where the ERP came from business process automation in the inventory and warehousing management. We're finding that from that originating source back decades ago, building out business process automation from some of the data driven out of the warehouse and out of inventory to help teams like accounting, HR, and some of the back office. And then even in the last decade or so, some of the ERPs are introducing CRM modules, marketing modules, support modules. But what we find when we're talking to folks at Bonfire here, when we're talking to customers out there that are looking for a better option, is that a lot of manual work is still happening outside of the ERP. A single proprietary software stack for all business process and automation has really never been enough. And whether that's an ERP or even a procure-to-pay system in this example that might be more specialized, one software stack that controls many things is usually not quite enough. As we know, there's a growing amount of tech savvy in the industry. There's a changing workforce, and there's evolving technologies that are creating more opportunities to solve existing problems through software. And that's where we think we've really started to see some of the explosive growth of SaaS players and SaaS offerings out there that are starting to solve point problems and even deep workflow problems inside of some of the areas that have traditionally always been managed by an ERP or even a P2P solution. Salesforce is a great example of one of those that have been around for probably now, I don't know my history, but maybe a decade or more. But really dominating that CRM marketing and Salesforce space. And that's a great example of a really, really deep workflow solution that has a ton of benefit to that team, but doesn't really manage inventory at all. So, Andrew, I'm wondering here, there's definitely an emerging trend of more SaaS players out there that are starting to solve some of the problems alongside an ERP. Hoping maybe you can comment on, are they replacing the ERP? Are they amending or augmenting the ERP? And maybe in practice, what's your experience here?
Yeah, I come from the era of ERP first strategy. I've gone through, different implementations where every business process or task had to be done by the ERP. I've also been on the flip side of that where, no, we're going to take a best in breed approach and, look at specific applications for each business process. And this was back in the day before SaaS. So that, both ways had their complications. The first way where it was ERP for everything, it usually didn't satisfy the business once you start getting away from those core, say, financial or transactional functions into the more collaborative. You mentioned Salesforce is a good example of that on the sales side where it just didn't work and they grew really fast. On the other side, when you start looking at sourcing, where it requires a lot more participation from different stakeholders, whether that be internal to the organization or external, it becomes complicated using the ERP or one way of doing things for things that could be much different each time you perform that task. Then when you were looking at the best of breed solution back in when they were first introduced, or that approach, there was a lot of time and money being spent on integrations, where I think this is where SaaS has really changed that today. And you made a good comment, working alongside the ERP. So what I see is a lot of companies out there today, it's not as much about integration, it's about layering on top of existing technologies or working in tandem with them. There's still levels of integration, which I think are much easier back in the day. But I know that was a lot of the drivers that were forcing companies to go to this one ERP for everything, just because of the amount of integration, the amount of number of points of failure, and those types of things.
So in the Bonfire perspective, we hear a lot of initial responses when we reach out and we say, hey, we have an e-sourcing solution. Some of the responses, well, we can do sourcing in our ERP, or we can do sourcing in our P2P system. The next question usually is, well, does your team use it? Do your stakeholders use it? Do your suppliers use it? And more often than not, we're finding that while it may start inside of the ERP module or even a P2P module, it gets pulled out and into spreadsheets and email and PDF where the data then needs to be aggregated again and potentially the results put back into the system. So how do modular solutions start to, I guess, digitize some of that manual work? And, where is that magic point, I guess, between the stuff that was manual and getting back in? Like, what needs to be in the SaaS solution so that you can actually digitize the whole process?
I think for one, companies nowadays are looking for tools that can accommodate many different types of purchases. I think ERPs offer really one way of doing things. So there's that flexibility or adaptability within the tool itself. Those that have gone through ERP implementations know that, out of the box usually doesn't work, usually requires a lot of configuration, customization. That is really a point in time, right? So a SaaS-based tool really needs to be able to adapt to different types of processes or strategies within the procurement team or the company. The other big thing is when you start talking about sourcing or going outside of, say, the core purchasing team, you're now involving other key stakeholders within an organization that are not necessarily procurement people per se. So they're not in the system day in and day out. So there's a training or a learning curve there. So I think most companies are looking for something that literally requires zero to any training at all, right? Just be able to go in, use the system, and get out. In my experience, when you're trying to give them a system that's very hard to use, not intuitive to the end user, you, as the owner of that application, are going to be spending a lot of time training the end user.
A lot of really great points there. Thank you, Andrew. For the audience, so ahead of this webinar, we had been working with Andrew to develop a list of kind of the pros and cons, or what an ERP can do and what it can't do. So I'm going to pop that up now. Should be able to see, there we go. So Andrew, I'm hoping you can start to comment on some of the answers that you provided here.
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to sourcing, where or procurement overall, where ERPs check the boxes, and we've already said that is supply chain integration. And you see a lot of this more on the manufacturing or direct side of procurement. Again, they do very well at transacting off of an established contract, and then integrating within the different systems within the organization. Again, the ordering system, inventory management, the financials, which is AP. Procure to pay falls within that. It's really, again, same idea there. You're transacting off of a pre-established contract or supplier relationship, which simple quoting, they do offer very basic of what I find, RFQ type quoting. But again, a lot of times that works well if you have incumbent suppliers that you need to request quotes for. They're very, provide one way of doing things, but may work well with an incumbent supplier because all the parameters are loaded within that system. Again, to my point I just mentioned about centralized purchasing, in a very transactional environment where all the buyers within the organization are centralized within one team, they would work well there just because of the high learning curve and the complexities to that system. They're in that system day in and day out. Where they fall short, and this goes back to the initial points I said around flexibility, adaptability, and collaboration, is really where they start to break down. Like I just mentioned, most organizations are looking for tools that cover a broad range of different types of purchases or procurement strategies, which again, ERPs offer one way of doing things. I mentioned about the basic capabilities around simple quoting and quoting with incumbent suppliers, organizations that are looking to do more complex RFPs where there's multiple geographies involved, multi-stakeholders, number of suppliers, etc. That's where ERPs tend to fall down a little bit, or there's still some gaps. And as we've mentioned already, they're not very adaptable to the current processes or desired strategies from the procurement team. Sourcing, as most of the audience would know today, requires a significant amount of collaboration between suppliers, internal stakeholders, management, etc. And the more modular-based applications are much more intuitive to the end user, which promotes that, whether that be the supplier, the internal stakeholder or business unit within the organization, even senior management that needs to go in and out of the system. The applications that are meant for sourcing are very easy to use in most cases, require very little or no training at all. And I just mentioned my experience with ERPs is, unless you're in the system day in and day out, it can be very difficult to use or remember how to use them. So once you train a user, they might only be in that if they're an evaluator on a large RFP. They may only be in that project for a week and then not have to use the system for another few months, which makes it very difficult because you're constantly retraining your users. The last point here around foster innovation and competition. This is really, looking for a tool that moves with your business. So, I just find these more SaaS-based tools, they're constantly up, not only on, current technology, but with the way things are being done. And it's really a tool serving, a process that is meant to serve. The other thing it does is, and we have competition here, is when you're using a tool that is designed for what it's supposed to do, you're going to create better innovation amongst suppliers, better competition amongst suppliers, better innovation within your own organization because the participation rate is going to increase.
Thanks for that, Andrew. The next poll is ready now. And so, with some of these limitations and opportunities of sourcing within an ERP or even a P2P system, as Andrew mentioned, we're really curious to know what your biggest challenge is. So poll responses on the screen here. If you do mark other, we hope that you chime in the Q&A to tell us what your biggest challenge is if it's not covered on the slide here. So again, I'm going to give a few seconds to get through this poll, and we'll jump back in momentarily here. Okay, we'll just give it a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds here, and then we'll jump right back in. Okay, so let's jump over to the responses here and find out. Oh, did we lose the results? Let's see if we can get these results up here. There we go. Okay. So stakeholder engagement, I mean, personally, with Bonfire, this doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, stakeholder engagement is one of the things that the Bonfire solution really focuses on as a design principle, as a way that we deliver features to our customers. Curious, Andrew, visibility looks like number 2, and then really, not a strong showing from the other areas. Does this ratio of response surprise you at all?
No, not with stakeholder engagement being number 1, visibility being number 2. I would expect to see user adoption, goes along with stakeholder engagement. But my experience in just that, is alluding to in terms of the collaboration, where, it's hard enough trying to, get stakeholder engagement in your process, and whether that's at the right time, having your stakeholders engaging procurement at the right time in the process, and even continually to participate in the process. And a lot of times that starts around, one, the process itself. So if it's too cumbersome, if procurement's too hard to work with, the team's not going to want to work with them. You layer on top of that a system that is not easy to use, hard to understand. It just adds those additional complexities, or may infuriate the stakeholder even more. So I'm not surprised with that. But that's where I'd expect to see user adoption as a challenge much higher, or along the same percentage as stakeholder engagement. Because without the stakeholder, especially if you're talking more on the indirect side of procurement, majority of sourcing engagements would involve at least one stakeholder from the business. Generally speaking, they are the subject matter experts, or SME. So I'm surprised user adoption is as low as it is there.
Thanks, Andrew. So this actually might be a good time to address one of the questions that has come in, which is asking to categorize some of the other e-sourcing players out there, specifically SAP Ariba, and where that would fall. And it's a great question, and it wasn't explicitly discussed earlier. So I'm going to give you my Bonfire answer on this one, and I'm going to try to be objective, but inevitably I probably won't be 100% objective. So maybe, Andrew, you can apply yours too. On paper and on specs, SAP Ariba would be in the same category as Bonfire. However, the way that we have designed our product is fundamentally different. SAP Ariba, from my knowledge, is a little bit more of a program to manage direct spend and some of the sourcing activities related to that. Bonfire, the primary benefit often of Bonfire is to find opportunities to save in indirect spend, to run formal processes for even categories like MRO and other indirect categories, partnering with departmental stakeholders to find opportunities to optimize budget. And because Bonfire gets used in that way, referencing back to the stakeholder engagement, number 1 to us is the ability for any user, whether it's the project manager or the buyer, the evaluating team, or even the supplier, to jump in, to do what they need to do, and to get right back out again. And we find that when people are transferring over to Bonfire from another solution, those are the things that they're missing in other platforms, is the ability to run a process in a way that is lightweight enough, that doesn't require a lot of training, but still supports the formality and the process that the buying team needs to go through to make an important decision. Andrew, any comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I think you did a good job categorizing it, Cam, between direct and indirect. And yeah, that's probably one good differentiator. I was kind of expecting this question a little bit because I get asked it all the time, especially those. I mean, I was an Ariba user before SAP bought them. So I understand how the view SAP Ariba, as a standalone or modular-based application, it could be viewed as that, or is it part of the bigger SAP? And I think things have changed a little bit, but again, it goes back to what those companies are focused on. So I think SAP Ariba, you could classify it more to the ERP side because they're really focused on, integrating the entire supply chain, where modular-based applications such as Bonfire, your focus is strategic sourcing. And as you mentioned, that tends to be more prevalent on the indirect side versus the direct side. But I do still see some things within SAP Ariba where individual or users are still doing things outside of the system when it comes to indirect procurement. Again, a lot of evaluation is still done within Excel. It's a little bit different because it is done in Excel and it can be uploaded into Ariba, downloaded back out. But again, a lot of activity is still happening outside of the system.
Okay, hopefully that answers the question that came in. Please, if you have other comments on that, we'd love to hear them from you, and we can have a discussion about this again towards the end. I'm going to try to pick up the pace just a little bit because I want to make sure we save some time for Q&A. So I'm going to jump back into the slide deck here. So, Andrew, if I'm not mistaken, I think we've probably covered off on a lot of the challenges, and we've been pretty hard on ERPs for sourcing. And I think based on the survey responses earlier, I'm actually happy to see that some people, even the majority of respondents today, are already thinking of e-sourcing as a viable solution on top of the ERP. Before we move on and start talking about the modular side of the house, are there any further last comments I guess you wanted to make about the challenges of sourcing that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, sure. Probably the bottom two there, control and visibility. I know visibility just came up on the poll, but really, once you have high resource effort, you have low stakeholder engagement, even low adoption. I mean, that you lose control, or there's lack of control within your processes, which then leads to visibility, which is true line of sight into everything that's going on within your organization, especially from a procurement or spend perspective.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you for adding that. So at this point in the presentation, we're going to save another 10, maybe 15 minutes here to just talk a little bit about the modular in a specific way. So, from a technology point of view, the assessment of ERP really is that you're connecting departments, you're connecting business processes for forecasting, reporting, and coordinating different transactions through all the parts of the business. The strength of the ERP, as shown on this slide, is the horizontal integration. Really, the way that I categorize it in my head is it's the what happens and when in a business. It's your standard business process automation, and it's rigid really because it has to be, versus the modular solution, which is really going vertically integrated on how a workflow actually works. And that's a major difference from what. It's really getting deep on the human system processes that really run your business. There's multiple stakeholders, there's multiple moments of collaboration that need to happen inside of a department. The ERP is a fantastic resource to connect the data of those things, but then to actually automate some of those workflows and strengthen them, that's where the modular solutions have the leg up on the ERP. Andrew, I don't know if you've actually seen the slide before, so I'm going to surprise you and try to ask you to comment on this a little bit as well.
Yeah, I know probably most of the attendees are from the U.S., so I always use the Sky Dome here in Toronto or the Rogers Centre now as a good example, right? It's good for a whole bunch of things, but it's not really good at one thing, as we said a few times. So I think it just goes back, just looking at this now, I mean, it really goes back to our points where, modular-based applications really dive deep into each specific business area, business problem, task, or whatever. And then I think today, just the way things all work together really roll up to kind of give you that horizontal view as well that an ERP would provide. I still think, obviously, ERPs are not going away, and they're probably, every company will have one, but it's really more at that core transactional level, right? When you're talking whether that's financials, whether that's inventory or production, et cetera. But when you kind of expand out, I think here's where you probably want to, like, there's a lot more red on that screen than there is green. And so you probably want to look at, diving deeper down into each one of those.
Okay, thank you. So, jumping into a couple of the benefits for modular solutions, as we started to reference throughout the whole presentation, but, my read on it, Andrew, is there's 4 major benefits. And these are the ones that when we're talking with our customers, these are the ones that we hear back. So, with increased productivity, this really boils down to having the relevant tools and good tools for the end-to-end strategic sourcing workflow so that actually can be mandated for the first time. With ERPs, you couldn't really mandate a tool and a process because it just wouldn't be followed. Yeah. With an investment into a tool that specifically solves the problem, the roadblock is removed and more can be done with the same resources truly, instead of kind of living up to the promise of an ERP module being able to handle that. When more is done in the system, there's improved reporting. So this is not just data reporting for the benefit of other modules within the ERP, but this is reporting on what's really happening. So in Bonfire, we report on team capacity, we report on pipeline, we report on throughput, velocity, and of course, money saved. And some of those things are metrics that you couldn't report within an ERP. So here, if you're asked to, report up and out about the progress or even the capacity of a procurement team or a buying team, we have a better read on what's actually happening instead of maybe what the ERP wants to say is happening. Because you have the relevant tools, there's increased agility and speed. So the tools often in SaaS are developed from a bottom-up perspective and working in a product team. We're trying to solve workflow problems instead of mandating a data connection from the top. We're meeting with the real users and building products that solve workflows from the bottom up instead of from the top down. And so that means that there's a little bit more agility and purpose-built aspects of the tool that solve the needs of teams. And then finally, it really always comes back to engagement for us. And I know I've mentioned this a few times before, but when people actually use the system, every metric strengthens and everything goes up. So, that's my Bonfire read on it. But I know, Andrew, you had some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they were all good points, and that's exactly what I see. I mean, but probably the number one thing that most procurement people would like to see, or what I've seen as, I guess, a product or benefit of all these. So once you have the ability to mandate a process, if that works culturally within your organization, or once you increase adoption or supplier engagement, then you start seeing the company use the proper procurement processes, procedures, strategies, et cetera. So the big benefit I see there is cost savings, which it's probably the number one metric that procurement organizations are measured on today. And I know the industry standard, they say, is 14% more savings per sourcing event across the technology vendors. I've seen where technologies with higher adoption rates that get over to 20%. So right there, I think an increase in cost savings. The other reason for higher cost savings is you're able to engage more suppliers on a specific sourcing event, as opposed to doing it manually. So a manual process or a process that you're using multiple different systems, you're probably at best able to invite 4 to 6 suppliers, where you could probably double that by using an application for what it's meant to do. The other big one for that, is better quality suppliers, obviously. Same sort of idea. Using the right technology platform will allow you to, better research the marketplace, and whether that's through a pre-qualification process, such as an RFI, where you could literally solicit up to 30 or so vendors and then shortlist that down to a manageable number for a competitive process.
Andrew, I think that's you mentioned a couple good points there about when to use an ERP and when modular has a bit more strength. And we received a question that I think is actually relevant to address right now. I'm going to try to paraphrase it down a little bit, but specific to direct spending and using multiple systems in large enterprise to manage spend, and sometimes that spend is a number that's put into the system after the fact. There's a notion here from the question that specific to direct spending and production procurement, what are your thoughts for large size enterprises having to first clean up their ERP systems and consolidating all the data before reaching out to outsourced companies? So I think, can a modular solution fit with an ERP, or is the notion of an ERP data having to be cleaned before you can start using like a third-party modular solution? Does that hold any water?
No, I don't think you have to wait until the data within the current RFP needs to be fixed, because again, a modular solution could layer on top of that or beside it. The one thing, I got another thought to this, but the one thing before I move to that, the nice part about, say, if you're using a modular sourcing solution where it's not fully integrated within your ERP, or if I've seen this with other clients, is the vendor actually doesn't become part of the master record within the ERP until they're actually going to do business with that supplier. So a lot of organizations who use ERP for sourcing need to have vendors set up within the ERP, and then they might not ever choose to go with them or do business with them. So from that standpoint, it's almost like you can put the flag in the ground, and from this point forward, we're going to have clean data. So I think it helps from that aspect. The part about outsourcing, it maybe doesn't apply to this webinar, but I've done a lot of outsourcing, and the general rule is you always clean up your own shop first before you look to somebody else to help you with that. But I think when you're talking specifically between the different functions, purchasing, sourcing, contract management, I think they can work in tandem, and you could almost use a sourcing tool to help clean up a lot of that stuff, I think.
Yeah, I want to make one final point on that. We actually have some of our customers that are using Bonfire as a broad-reaching RFI. So potentially they're engaging with 20, 30, 40 vendors for a multiple stage RFI before they're ready to go to a more formal purchasing project like an RFP. In doing that, you can engage with a large pool of vendors, but really only have to go forward and put those selected vendors and those qualified vendors, even a pre-qual RFI, into your ERP. Or even if you really want to keep things clean, you're only entering the winning vendor or the winning supplier into your ERP. So you're not, I guess, proliferating the data problem. You're trying to clean it up as you're running these RFIs outside of your core ERP system.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And it goes back to, that's what I was alluding to as well, to just being able to engage more suppliers. But what's nice with that is I find a lot of companies skip the RFI process because it's just too time consuming to send out a document to that many suppliers, where if you have a solution that really expedites that, you can really make effective use of that strategy.
Okay, great. Conscious of time, I'd like to try to get through a couple final points here before we jump into the Q&A. We do have a couple of really great questions queued up. So couple of parting thoughts here. How do you find a sourcing solution? So there's really four key considerations that we find when we're starting to guide people who are in the very early discovery stage of finding a purpose-built sourcing solution. And the first is that it handles your whole workflow. And that's not just repetitive tasks that can be automated that you already know you want to automate, but these also could be fairly complex workflows where people and technology need to collaborate together. And that's really where Bonfire, where we find a lot of strength, is that, the people-human process interaction. The next one is not reinventing your process. So unlike using an ERP or a P2P system for sourcing, these best-of-breed modular solutions like Bonfire are built to work the way you do. And you really need to make sure that it does work the way you do, because while you move to a sourcing, like a vertical sourcing solution, you do have an opportunity to clean up process, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you want to make sure that the things that are working for your team are preserved and strengthened. So it is really a a transformational moment, but you don't want to ignore all the progress you've made to date. You need to provide that flexibility to scale. So as with any large implementation, there's pain when the requirements that started a year ago have changed. And so inevitably, the only thing that's constant is change, and you need to make sure that your system can grow and change with you without needing a lot of development or needing a lot of core time from the provider. And then finally, something that often gets overlooked is world-class support, in knowing that you're a phone call away or an email away from getting tactical support, workflow support in the project that you're trying to execute. There's nothing worse than having to delay timelines because of a technical problem, or vendors having trouble and having to reach out to the buyer. Maybe the buyer is busy and can't get back to them right away. You want to make sure that any support in any company that you're starting to work with is not only supporting you, but when there's collaboration involved, they're supporting your internal stakeholders, they're supporting your evaluation team, and you're also supporting their vendors. They're going to intercept vendor problems and help them solve those so that your project runs on time. Andrew, anything that I've missed here?
Yeah, I always go back to flexibility, adaptability, collaboration. Those are kind of my top three things, and I won't go into too much more detail here, but just a point on the flexibility to scale. And what I see a lot of times is a lot of companies are out there, oh, well, we don't do RFPs. Well, why don't you do RFPs? And a lot of it is just because of their current systems or processes, to be frank, will not allow them to do that. So, that could be a consideration. Is that a strategy that would work within your organization? It's obviously, it can be debated whether it's still a valid strategy today, but it's a best-in-class strategy. Competition drives best price, best suppliers. So there's things like that you should also give consideration for what should you be doing, what is best in class within the marketplace, or what strategies are you not making use of today because of your current technologies or processes, and what could you make use of within a modular-based application.
Okay, wonderful. The final point that I'd like to leave us with before we jump into the budding and exciting Q&A that's right around the corner, software investment profile. So oftentimes when you're looking at a larger scale P2P system or even an ERP system, something that you'd call monolithic, that brings different departments together, there's a lot of requirements. There's a lot of people that need to be involved. There's a long time investment often, and there's also a deep cash investment to get everything working the way that you need it to work until you flip that switch. There we go. Until you flip that switch kind of at the bottom of the apex of that triangle, and you start to realize that ROI. Versus when, I don't know why it's resetting, sorry everyone. Versus investing in modular special purpose applications, which are also much lighter. So you're making a small cash investment and you're starting to realize that benefit. And maybe one of those intersections is Bonfire, and then the next one is another application adjacent to it, and another application adjacent to it, where instead of making a long time investment and a long cash investment into realizing a future goal, you're able to tactically and tangibly invest now and start to realize the benefits now, and then grow on that momentum over time. So as a final thought, Andrew, does this mental model make sense to you? Is this something that in your experience you've seen, maybe the good and the bad of this?
Yeah. I've been through a few implementations of ERPs myself, as well as I've helped other clients with them as well. And I think that's exactly it, right? There's a lot of cost, both on the licensing as well as the implementation side. You would need to engage a third-party integrator to help you with the implementation. So there's obviously the huge investment, time, but when you get to that point at the bottom of the apex there, things might have changed. By the time, you're looking at least a year. You're lucky if you do it within a year, a full ERP system. It's closer to 2 years. And then by that time, in today's business environment, things change so quickly. So by the time you get to that point, you're just hoping that, okay, everything will still work the way it was intended to work, but business processes have changed. So then you need to go back, and there's a bunch of rework that generally needs to happen. When you talk sourcing, and for those on the phone, a lot of times being a back office function such as sourcing, it's not as visible as much within the project. So you're more a second or third phase even. So by the time they get to you, if you're going to go through, and I've done this myself, where you start with P to P and you build your way out, by the time they get to the sourcing, it's probably a couple years out, where here on your diagram, if you start with that sourcing piece up front, you're going to start realizing instant ROI. And generally speaking, the ROI is, within the first project or two, is what I've seen, where ERPs obviously would take much, much longer if an ROI is ever actually met.
Great. Okay, I think it's time for questions. We have a number of them queued up, so I think I'm turning it over to our hosts to ask some of the questions, and then Andrew and I will try to jump in.
Excellent. Yeah, let's open up this Q&A portal and see what we've got right off the bat. Okay. All right. This first question reads, what are some tactical examples of streamlining the sourcing process?
So I can start with this one. So the sourcing process goes back all the way to preparing a project, from working with your business stakeholders to figure out what the criteria are, even before that to figuring out where to focus in on optimizing budget. So I know streamlining is a business cliched term, but in tangible ways, Bonfire has internal collaboration tools and criteria collaboration tools to build out a project before it ever gets introduced to a supplier network, but to do that all in a tool and to document all the changes and inputs so that you know not only what you like to buy, but how you need to buy it and how you need to evaluate it, through to sending out and engaging with the market with a digital portal, with commodity code matching, with geo matching, vendor list matching, et cetera, to find the large enough supplier network to have the right kind of competition, to receiving responses in a structured way so that when it comes time to auto-score pricing or auto-score yes-no data, and then side-by-side evaluate all the qualitative aspects of the decision. It could be long lists of questions. It could be responses to certain elements of a proposal. Those often are done by having to read a 70-page RFP and then flip open your Excel scorecard after the fact. In Bonfire, that's all done in a document viewer with data that's separated in meaningful ways and even sent to only the stakeholder or the subject matter expert that needs to review that one piece, with the scorecard attached and right live in the browser that you can pop open and start to fill out. So, if people want to start to see some of the streamlined ways that Bonfire can help, then, a demo is the best way to do that. So I would encourage reaching out and receiving that demo after the fact. Andrew, anything to add on making a cliched word like streamlined meaningful?
Yeah. I think you kind of covered the process end to end there, Cam, which was good. But for me, maybe I'll just take one piece, and it's really around the evaluation part of the entire process, because that's really where all the time is spent, or what takes the most time, and where all the risk is. If anything should go wrong, it's usually because something happened within the evaluation step of the process. So these tools out there today, what's really nice about them, one, it reduces the time significantly, both on the procurement side, as you mentioned, being able to, automate a, qualitative or quantitative evaluation within seconds, just a click of the button, by being able to structure an RFP in such a way that, once the suppliers respond, and it's instantaneously calculated. Then on the qualitative side, what's really nice is you are able to give, especially when you have multi-stakeholders involved in a process, you're able to give them just the information they need to evaluate. So what I see, what breaks down a lot, especially on the indirect side where there is multiple stakeholders involved, you really need them to participate in the process to get good results or a good evaluation of supplier, because they're the subject matter experts, whether that's being IT, facilities, marketing, or whatever, but you need their input into the process. If the process is too hard or the tool is too complicated to use, they're not going to participate and the results are going to be skewed. Where you have a very good sourcing tool, that would help streamline it. So where they're able to get in the system, evaluate what they need to evaluate, they're not looking at 60 pages, as you mentioned, Cam, able to provide that and send it back to procurement. At the same time, procurement's able to manage and has direct line of sight of where everybody is in the evaluation process. So that helps speed up not only them managing the project, but also allows them to make sure who needs to evaluate actually did evaluate.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So there's probably a whole bunch I could go on with.
Yeah. I want to make sure we save time for some other questions. So what's the next question?
All right. This next question reads, it's a little bit lengthy. So it says, I strongly believe the hardest aspect when partnering with a modular solution, for example, in the downstream negotiation to contract management portion, the hardest part of implementation is onboarding the suppliers onto the platform. This is particularly so with larger enterprises that work with tier 1 suppliers that are smaller in scale and not big brand names like Samsung or Seagate. What are your thoughts on this, and do you have any recommendations?
Of course, there's 3 primary stakeholders: the project manager or the buyer, the evaluation team, and then the supplier. The vendor network is a key part of that triangle. And I'll comment from the Bonfire point of view that that's often the question that we get in our implementation towards the, before we sign off on a deal to purchase Bonfire, we need to talk about implementation. Transferring your vendor network over, a key part of that is their first experience. And if they get an email that says, we're using a new way to go to market and we have a project and we'd like for you to participate on it, and that experience is a really good one with support, with an implementation team that can handle that for you, where we can have a list of your vendors and start reaching out to them via email and getting them to come into the Bonfire portal and sign up and fill out their information. We find that in that hand-holding and in that making sure that that first step is done well, people are transitioned over and we monitor those that haven't and try to get them on the platform. But I guess the closing thought on that one is we have an implementation team that's with you for weeks and even longer to make sure that your transition is done well, to make sure that not just your buying team is trained, but your evaluators and your vendors and suppliers are trained on how to use Bonfire, and we're here for them if they do have questions. So, we recognize that it's a challenge, and we try to mitigate it as much as possible with good old-fashioned human help and customer service. Andrew?
Yeah, that's a good. I guess my only comment here is really it's a good opportunity to clean up the system. And I find, and I've lived it, where your vendor master file is a nightmare and it has way too many vendors in there, many that should be inactive, removed entirely from the system. So I always see it as a good opportunity to really clean up the vendor data master file.
Okay, great. Next question.
All right. This next one is for you, Cam. During sourcing events, does Bonfire allow you to build complex pricing templates? For example, like 1,000+ locations, 5 different pricing components, and 5 different suppliers. They're asking if where you can run scenarios with different constraints. For example, no supplier can win more than 500 stores, or supplier A can't win anything in California. Similar to Jagger or SciQuest or CombineNet?
Yes, so we can do that. This is really where Bonfire was built, between multi-phase, multi-location, multi-category decision-making. And those types of projects are really my favorite. And usually we have one of our customer success managers who are dedicated and assigned to an account. We usually have one of those folks partnered up with the buyer who's running a project like that to maximize Bonfire to its fullest, to make sure that project is done quickly. So without going into a ton of feature depth, there's 2 primary ways that you would do that. We have a feature called multi-category decision, where you can have almost parent and child decisions, where there's a master project and a number of micro decisions that need to be made, whether that's suppliers in different regions or suppliers for different facilities or even for different trades or things that they can supply inside of an overall project. The other one is a tool that we call bid tables, which really is Excel on steroids. And it's a way for you to go to the market to ask for any number of pricing variables. And then as it comes back in, all of those vendor and supplier responses are popped up side by side. There are filters so that you could filter for, say, state in the case of the California only or none in California. You could also filter for, different things like price, hours, really any unit that you'd like, you can filter for some of those. And then you can go and pose some different scenarios between awarding to one supplier or awarding, 2, 3, 4 suppliers, awarding them with the contract and seeing what that would do for price. So in a short answer to a long question, yes, we do absolutely have the ability to do that, and we're really excited to work on those with our customers because they're very interesting. And looks like we have 2 minutes left. Is there one more question that we might be able to answer quickly there?
Yes. Let's see. So we actually just had a couple come through, but let's see if we can focus on this one. This question reads, my company and our suppliers are very comfortable with manipulating Excel and uploading changes to our ERP. How easy is it to use both within the SaaS apps?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question and fairly complementary almost to what we were just talking about. So, replacing Excel is not practical, and with Bonfire, there's a number of different templates that you can generate to then have our suppliers download, fill out that template in Excel in a data validated way, in a way that blocks anything from happening that shouldn't be in the Excel template, but really enables the vendors to supply their answers using a file format that they're comfortable with. So instead of having to log into the portal every time to supply a lot of information, the RFX response could be filled out in Excel. It could be passed around to the different subject matter experts at the supplier and then uploaded back into Bonfire before the decision needs to be made. That also enables our tools like bid tables to pop up all of those vendor answers side by side and then evaluate them online. So the benefit to that really, and the reason that we haven't tried to force people out of Excel, is that lots of people are comfortable with Excel, and that's perfectly fine. But then when it comes to having an audit trail and having a digital way to make that decision, those Excel templates can be uploaded into the tool and then managed online for that final decision making with the final audit process and all the details there. Andrew, any final comments on marrying Excel and a tool like this, or did I cover it?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. And I have seen companies out there where they'll download Excel from the ERP system, upload it to Bonfire, and then download it back into an ERP. So it even works well that way versus having to come up with some sort of big integration.
Okay, great. I guess it's right at the 2 o'clock mark here. So on behalf of Bonfire, I'd like to thank everyone. And then Andrew, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Any final words from our hosts?
Yes. Just want to give a big shout out to our attendees for joining us today, sending through tons of amazing questions, and there were even some that unfortunately we weren't able to get to. We will definitely follow up post-webinar to carry on with the conversation. And also let's not forget a huge thank you to the Bonfire team for hosting such a wonderful webinar session. As I mentioned, we'll be in touch shortly to follow up on the conversation. We also have a very short survey set up, kind of like a feedback form. It's about 3 questions. Once we close out of the webinar, you can leave any feedback from today's session, as well as any possible topics you want to see in future webinars. We can only make these bigger and better with your help. Also, feel free to click on the banner that's right up on your screen to visit the ProcureCon Indirect East website for more info and about that discount code. You can either click on that banner or you can email us directly at webinar@wbresearch.com. The presentation from today will be available very soon for on-demand viewing, and everyone on the line today will receive that information in about 24 hours from now. It'll be an email coming directly from On24, so keep an eye out from that. On behalf of Bonfire, the ProcureCon teams, and WBR Insights team here at Worldwide Business Research, I want to thank you all so much for attending. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time, everyone, take care.